The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to support the Tariff Amendment Bill. The Tariff Amendment Bill is necessary in order to bring into effect the free trade agreement negotiated between New Zealand and Korea. And I want to set out the reasons why I think that's important. It's not a perfect free trade agreement by any extent. There's some major omissions in that free trade agreement. But the conclusion that I come to is that New Zealand is better off for having it than not having it, and by a significant margin. We didn't spend a lot of time at the Select Committee looking at this particular bill, Mr Speaker, because we had previously examined the national interest analysis on the free trade agreement when we reported to the House on the free trade agreement. And what interested me was that every party represented on the Select Committee agreed that on balance we needed to have this free trade agreement, which is why I don't understand why two parties in the House are going to oppose it. And I hope that when New Zealand First and the Greens get to their feet, they explain why they would vote against this agreement when there are clear and worthwhile benefits for New Zealand in supporting it, which they acknowledged, I think quite fairly, because they were conscientious in the work they did looking at the national interest analysis. I think when it comes to trade, we try to make sure we do what is right for the country first and foremost. And, over a long period of time, there has been an endeavour to have a bipartisan policy in this House on trade agreements. Why does Labor support this agreement? Well, first of all, we have a long track record as being a free trade party. I remember under my predecessor, Jim Sutton, we negotiated the P5 agreement, which is a high-quality and comprehensive agreement. I was the minister responsible for the China Free Trade Agreement and the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. Both of those agreements met the highest standards in terms of eliminating tariff barriers on all of our major products and being comprehensive. I'm proud of both of them. I'm particularly proud of the China Free Trade Agreement that helped alleviate what would have been a much more severe recession for New Zealand if we did not have that free entry into China and we did not have the track record that we had in building up that relationship. I also take some responsibility for the initiation of the Korean Free Trade Agreement, and I say that on the basis of a study that we initiated between the New Zealand Institute of International Research and the Korean Institute for International Economic Policy. In 2007, we got a report from that study group, and that report said that New Zealand and Korea had a strong and complementary relationship, that a free trade agreement was feasible, and there were mutual benefits for both countries in negotiating a deal. That was in 2007. Well, we're now in 2015, so the negotiation took some time. And I'm not casting aspersions on the Minister of Trade. I think Tim Grosser did the very best that he could. He worked conscientiously on it, and the agreement that we've got is worthwhile. But it's also fair to say, as Russell McVeigh has said in their analysis of the free trade agreement, that those expecting similar results to China were going to be disappointed. And there were some disappointing results in that, sir. Let's talk about why it's important first. It's important because we weren't first in line. We were first in line with China. We were not first in line with Korea. Korea had already had free trade agreements with the United States, Australia, Canada, China, the European Union, India, ASEAN, Chile, and some others. And what that meant for us was that our inability to get the agreement meant that our exporters were disadvantaged. And the clearest example of that was our kiwi fruit exporters. We were paying 45% tariff to get into the Korean market, and Chile, our major competitor in this area, had tariff-free entry. Our people were placed in an impossible position. So this free trade agreement, in many respects, was catch-up. It does not give us advantages over those that had already negotiated a free trade agreement, but it removed the competitive disadvantage that we could not possibly have tolerated our exporters having to continue to face. For those that oppose this agreement, explain to the beef industry how they could compete with the United States when the United States was going in tariff-free, or the Zespri people who are having to pay the 45%. Obviously, there are some good aspects to this agreement. Wine, 15% tariffs gone overnight. We have kiwi fruit, I've mentioned already. They'll be phased out over 6 years. We'll still have a disadvantage for the next 6 years, but if we get this bill in, we'll get the first cut by the end of this year. Butter, 89% tariffs. That'll go over 10 years. Cheese, 36%, go over 12. Wood, 10%, that'll go over 10 years. And salmon, 20%, that goes over 4 years. So there are some winners. Let's acknowledge the good things in this bill. There are also losers. Milk powder is one of our critical exports. The 176% tariff on milk powder remains. 176%. We get an expanding tariff-free quota, but we are still faced indefinitely with that huge tariff on milk powder. We are facing, for frozen deer velvet, 75% of our deer velvet exports are frozen. They will have an ongoing 15% tariff barrier. For paua and frozen squid, a 22% barrier. So we didn't get comprehensive. And I'm disappointed in that. I know the government will be disappointed in that. I still say what we did get is worth having, and we should not walk away from it. Why is it important to have the deal? Well, Korea is our 5th biggest export market. It's been growing up to the point of the free trade agreement by about 10% a year. The purchasing power of 51 million Koreans has been going up. They are the 13th biggest economy in the world. They're the 8th largest trading nation in the world. We needed a free trade agreement with Korea. And again, I say to my colleagues who share the opposition benches with us, you can't walk away from having a free trade agreement that is that important with such an important trading partner. The trade agreement eventually eliminates $229 million worth of tariffs. It helps not only in the agricultural areas, but areas like medical devices, like aviation, like marine, like precision engineering. There are benefits for us in that area. Services like education, legal and professional. So my key point, Mr. Speaker, is that the benefits outweigh the disappointments in this agreement, and we should do it. So why were people opposed to it? Well, most of the submissions came on the national interest analysis of the free trade agreement, and they were using Korea as a surrogate for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Mr. Speaker. In particular, they were opposed to the investor-state dispute settlement. Personally, I wouldn't have cared if we didn't have the ISDS with Korea. They are a country with the rule of law. We didn't need an outside disputes procedure if there was a fight over some investment deal. But the fact was, as officials advised us, the Koreans insisted on it. We wouldn't have had the deal, the officials said, without the ISDS, and we weren't going to walk away from this deal. The fact is, the wording in the investor-state disputes procedure is pretty much the same as what I put into the China deal, and it protects our sovereign right to legislate for the public good. So I'm not blaming the government for having it there, except for one thing. I'll make excuses for the government for the things that they couldn't get in it, but one thing they could have kept out of it was the automatic right for Korean investors to invest in our residential property. Now, I want to talk about the dishonesty of the Prime Minister, because he said, we've put this in there, and because Labor has a most favoured nation clause in its free trade agreement with China, China will get it too. Well, John Key knew that. He knew it at the start. He knew that a most favoured nation clause goes into every trade agreement, which is why you don't set a precedent like this government has set a precedent on the sale of residential property. In Auckland, we know that foreign investment is driving up house prices. We know it is making it impossible for Kiwi first home buyers of whatever ethnicity to get their own home. So my question to the next National Speaker, did you allow that to go through instead of carving it out like the Aussies did deliberately or was it incompetence? Because that's only two explanations that you can have. Was it deliberate to allow that in that would extend it to everybody to buy residential property that we ever have a free trade agreement with, or were you incompetent in just not noticing it when it went through? So, Mr Speaker, by and large, this is a good deal. I give credit to the Minister for working hard on it. It's not perfect, it's as good as he could have got, but he should have dealt with maintaining our sovereign right to protect residential housing against overseas investors who are pushing prices up.
David Bennett.
First Labor